there's just so much here that we can look at with our students. What we're going to do is we're going to dive into our latest bundle for teachers, the one on immigrant women in the Industrial Revolution. And I'm just going to walk you through a few of the activities that we recommend doing. We're going to spend a lot of time doing a political cartoon analysis, and then we'll talk about immigrant women in the Industrial Revolution more broadly, and then I'll introduce the entire series. So for this first activity, we're going to be using the primary source analysis tool by the Library of Congress. And what is so great about this is if you go to their website, they have some instructions and teacher's guides for how to use this with many different types of primary sources. So today we'll be using it for a political cartoon, but they can also be used to analyze oral histories, sheet music, charts, maps, all sorts of things. So they've really put together some great resources to help you use this with your students. So what I'd like us to do first is I've zoomed in on a very small section of this political cartoon, and I want you to take a moment and right now just observe, and you could do this in the chat. So for this, we're not analyzing, we're not asking questions, we're not reflecting. I just want you to identify and then note some details. So describe what you see. And some things that you could be thinking about would be, what do you notice first? You could describe what people and objects you see, and you can go ahead and do this in the chat. What words do you see? You could let us know what you see that looks different than it would in a photo. You could also think about if you see anything in here that could possibly refer to another work of art or literature. And so for those of you who maybe are looking at this on a small screen, there is a scroll, and what it says on here, as far as I can tell, is Bylaws of the Help Ladies Union. Work begins at 8 a.m. and ends at 9 p.m. sharp. 2 afternoons free each week and the whole of Sunday. No work March 17th. Free use of Mistress's bicycle. Matinee tickets every Wednesday. Use of music room on Cook's receiving night. And tickets of admission to nearest golf something. 2-week summer vacation with full pay. So what I'm seeing here is someone writes, women, the job doesn't end until it's time for bed. Someone else mentions help. What else are you seeing here? Anything else that you're observing? Yikes. Yep, it certainly evokes an emotion. Work to begin at 8 a.m. and end at 9 p.m. That's still a long work day. A 13-hour shift. I see a lot of people have zeroed in on that. That's why there are unions. And of course, we're talking about the Industrial Revolution. No work on March 17th. Someone noticed that's St. Patrick's Day. Someone else mentions Irish. St. Patrick's Day. Yep, a lot of people are noticing this connection to Ireland. A woman seems to be the one giving these bylaws. Yes, are both white ladies here. So the next question would be reflection. So with this, the idea would be to encourage students to generate and test some hypotheses about the source. So what do you think is happening? What issue do you think this is about? Who do you think the audience was for this? Yeah, 2-week summer vacation. That's another phrase that pops out. So what do you think this is about? Someone earlier mentioned unions. So perhaps this has to do with someone advocating for their rights. Women's rights. Irish women's labor incentives. Ladies' work. Yeah, there definitely seems to be a lot here to do with work. Women's worth. And while we're thinking about this, what other questions come up? Is there anything that you're wondering about that you'd like to learn more about? And I think once I'm going to show you the whole cartoon in a moment, and that should give you some more ideas. Rights of domestic workers from Ireland who are unionized. Is this a maid service? Someone else is noticing the outfit of the woman holding the bylaws. Is there some symbolism in what she's wearing? There's the question of, are these bylaws supposed to improve their conditions? So we would wonder what the current conditions are. Is the list meant for the reader to take seriously, or is it making fun of the woman for wanting this? Right, great question. Who is the audience? Where are they coming from? Perhaps it's both. All right, now here is the full cartoon. It's from 1899. So now that you see this whole cartoon, we can just look at this as a whole. But what are you questioning? What do you think about it? How does this change your view of what you were thinking? Does this change your view? So now we see there is the woman who I zoomed in on before, but we see that there are many other people here, all beautifully dressed. Interestingly, it seems like these ladies sitting down, these have these very sort of flowing, delicate, dainty type outfits, whereas the woman holding the bylaws is much more angular and somewhat sturdier. Right, the dresses change the context. Definitely the clothes are telling a story here. Are they trying to have their requests heard, mandating their working teams, perhaps? Interesting that the word mistress was used, probably a different definition, right? Maybe this definition has changed over time. Oh, the caption on the bottom. The caption on the bottom says, a look ahead, but not so very far ahead either. The man in the back is pointing as if to say, get out. Yes, he does not look happy. One single background. She is interrupting a social gathering. She is an outsider. Yes, they do not seem happy to see her, right? And the people don't seem to like her. The man is whispering to the woman. So I wonder what they're whispering about. Yes, the maid is taking off her apron. I wonder why. No one seems very interested in her. Could be making fun of domestic workers for wanting more rights. Perhaps they're saying, don't bring these ideas. The other maid is looking at the clock. I'm glad you mentioned that because I actually zoomed in here. If you look up at the time there, it looks like, yep, the clock says 9:05. And as we remember from the, let's see, from the Bill of Rights, from the scroll, they were saying that work should end promptly at 9 o'clock, and now it's 9:05. So perhaps that could be why she's taking off her apron. She's ready to go. Work is over. Anything else? All right, well, we're going to refer back to this in the rest of the session because it brings up a lot of themes that we're going to be talking about. What I'd like to do now is talk a little bit more about immigrant women, work, and society during the Industrial Revolution. So the next few slides are drawn from an essay by Tiffany Thompson, who's a PhD student with the History Department at Boston College. She wrote an original essay for us on this topic, which we've provided in our bundle, which is available for free. And then we also have leveled her essay so that it has versions that are more appropriate for middle and high school students so that it could be given to them directly. So first, quick refresher about the Industrial Revolution. It was the period from 1870 to 1914 when there was rapid industrialization and urbanization, and there were large-scale increases in mass productions. So in other words, we moved from handmade goods to machine-made products that were produced in factories. In the United States, the industrialization was concentrated in the Northeast and Midwest. So cities like Boston, where we are, Lowell, New York City, Philadelphia, also Cleveland, Detroit, and Chicago. And so this revolution in manufacturing, all of these factories fueled the need for workers in these cities. At the same time, the political and economic turmoil in Europe spurred the mass migration of millions of people. And the largest groups of immigrants to the US during this time were from Germany, Ireland, Italy, and Central and Eastern Europe. So as a result of all of this, immigrants formed the backbone of industrial labor. And in fact, by 1920, immigrants and their children made up over half of all factory workers in the United States. So while more men immigrated to the US during this time than women, immigrant women were a really important source of labor. Having women working was a major change in what Americans perceived as traditional family life and domestic labor. So what type of work did immigrant women do? For one, we had a newly formed middle class, and this middle class wanted people to work in their homes. And all of these domestic workers were Irish immigrant women, as we just saw in this cartoon. Let's see, immigrant women also worked in textile mills and garment factories. And factory owners hired the women and these children because they could pay them less than men. On average, they were paid only 1/3 to 1/2 of a man's salary. Also, factory owners believed that they could handle the intricate machinery better. And there was also a perception that they were more docile and submissive than men were. These factories were extremely dangerous places. People were expected to work 10 to 12 hours a day in these dark, dirty rooms with loud, unsafe machines, and accidents were unfortunately very common. In addition, immigrant women worked in laundries, canneries, meatpacking, tobacco and candy factories. In general, out of all of the women factory workers during this time, 2/3 were either first or second generation immigrants. Now, what is interesting about these jobs is that these were all at the time seen as sort of characteristic of women's work. So, in other words, because of common beliefs about gender roles, these jobs were seen as more suitable than other types of jobs. So that's why we see so many women in these industries. Now, in the early 1900s, there also was widespread labor organizing for men, women, and children workers. Let's see. Many immigrant women were inspired to participate in the labor movement because of the poor working conditions, so low wages, unsafe environments, and the lack of women's rights. One example that we talk about quite a bit in this resource is the uprising of 20,000, when more than 20,000 immigrants, mostly young Jewish immigrant women, launched an 11-week general strike in New York's garment industry. Many immigrant women were politically active by joining labor unions, advocating for women's suffrage, and participating in women's clubs. So the Industrial Revolution transformed Americans' economy, but it also really transformed the American society. So we were grappling with a number of problems: overcrowding in unsanitary cities, inadequate housing, exploitation of workers, environmental problems. And these traditional hierarchies and family structures were changing, and gender roles. And this appeared to some people that society was breaking down and they were looking for someone that they could blame. Something else to keep in mind is that middle-class notions of the time subscribed to this separate spheres ideology. So the idea that men were meant for the public sphere, work and politics, whereas women should stay in the private sphere, home and family. Having women working, of course, challenged this ideology because if you had working class families, they could never really live up to this expectation because they needed the money that the women were earning by working. And so then, since about 20% of women were working outside the home by 1900, this was a really visible group. Also, the immigrant women working in factories were primarily unmarried teenagers and young adults. So this provoked just a whole lot of anxieties about femininity, motherhood, and morality. On top of this, single motherhood was common among immigrant women. And because of this, they had their right to parenthood questioned because many believed that how could they possibly both work and care for their children properly? Immigrant women really bore the brunt of all these anxieties. And so in response to this, reformers tried to teach these immigrant women and other women, US-born women, these respectable femininity, and many working class women, both immigrant and US-born, really came to fear and resent the efforts of these reformers. All right, so what is the lasting impact? Immigrant women at this time were really integral to industrial growth and factory labor. They advocated for workers' rights and better conditions for themselves and for their communities. Their contributions laid the foundation for the modern labor movements, and their stories highlight the intersection of gender, class, and immigration. There's just so much here that we can look at with our students. I also wanted to quickly point out two specific women who we talk about a little bit, both Irish women activists during this time period. The first one on the left, I'm sure have heard of before. It's Mary Harris Jones, otherwise known as Mother Jones. She moved first to Canada as a child and then to the US as a young adult. She started off as a teacher and a seamstress in Michigan, and in a short 2-year period, 2 tragedies struck. In 1867, her husband and all 4 of her children died in the yellow fever epidemic. And then in 1871, her dressmaking shop was destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire. So after this, she became an organizer and an activist, supporting and leading hundreds of strikes for workers in many industries. She was banished from towns, arrested, jailed, but she continued organizing all the way into her 90s. She was really just a groundbreaking figure. A US attorney at the time called her, quote, the most dangerous woman in America. But something that could be interesting to mention to your students is that she did not support women's suffrage. She believed, in fact, that men should be paid well enough so that women could devote themselves to motherhood. We also point out the woman on the right, Leonora Kearney, who immigrated to the United States from Ireland when she was 3, settling in New York State. She became a teacher, married, and had 3 children. But then her husband and one of her child died. And after that happened, she couldn't return to teaching since only unmarried women could teach. So instead, she started to work in a mill. She was unhappy with the low wages, so she joined a union and quickly became an active member and rose high in the ranks. In 1887, she was elected to be the first paid female laborer investigator in the United States. So she traveled around the country reporting on working conditions for female laborers. And her reports were some of the first national collections of statistics on working women, and they remain a really invaluable historical source. So in the bundle, we include short bios of these 2 women and then 5 other foreign-born heroes of the Industrial Revolution. So what we do, and in our lesson, we ask students to reflect on this in small groups and then do a written reflection, which we're not going to do now because we don't have time. This isn't the right format. But I was hoping that you would take a moment just to think about these questions. Feel free to pop an answer in the chat. The first thing we want students to reflect on is, why is it important to include immigrant women in our understanding of the Industrial Revolution? We then want them to take it a step forward and ask, who might still be left out from the history of the Industrial Revolution, and why might that be? So what factors in the society of the time, maybe in the recording or telling of history, led to this imbalance? And then another thing we ask them to do, especially when looking at our 7 heroes of the Industrial Revolution, is to ask, like, how could we expand the definition of hero or notable person to include more people? So why are these people considered heroes? And let's reflect on that definition. So if anyone has any ideas, please feel free to pull them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to go on and tell a little bit more about the lesson bundle. So with this lesson bundle that I've been talking about, it has 2 lessons and then 1 extra activity. The 2 lessons are independent, so you could do one or the other. They don't have to go in a specific order. And one of the things that we try to do with both of them is to make a lot of connections to the present day. So what can this history tell us about now? How can we use this lens to interpret or build empathy and context for what's going on around us today? So you can see in this one, this first lesson has a political cartoon. That's the opener to get people involved. And then we do some background knowledge on workers' rights. Then we have them do a group jigsaw where they look at several immigrant-led labor strikes throughout time to look at the similarities and differences. And then they have a reflection and a response. The other lesson in this bundle has to do with the social question. So this is what we were talking about earlier, as far as how immigrant women's identities as both women and immigrants contributed to society perceiving them as a social question. So why were they being blamed? And with this, it starts off with a photo gallery walk. The photos are taken from the Library of Congress. They have such fantastic resources. They're all available for free. Then we have a leveled reading with some guided questions, structured discussion, and a written response. And then we end this bundle with our 7 foreign-born heroines of the Industrial Revolution. So we have 1-page biographies and then some discussion questions to have people think a little bit more critically about these women. This lesson bundle is just one of many that we have. We've designed them for grades 5 through 12, but they are adaptable for many different contexts. As you can see, we have started with the American Revolution. We've gone now through the Industrial Revolution. We have one that's coming out soon on the Cold War, but more to go. And please, if you have any ideas of topics, please let us know, because this is a work in progress. You can find these both at Share My Lesson. If you're part of that, we put them on there. It's free, but you have to make a login. Or you can go to our website. And we have everything online there. Again, you can just download it for free. If you do use it, please let us know because we're always looking at feedback to try to think of ways to make it better. I also wanted to just quickly call out some other resources, especially if you are doing younger grades. The Tenement Museum has some great online resources. They have lots of videos. They're connected with what they're doing in New York, but it's really can be used by everyone. And they have resources that range from elementary up through middle and high school. And they have a really great project that you can do called Your Story, Our Story, where you have students take an object that's meaningful for them, their family, talk about it, and then they can upload it. And they have this huge database of important items. Also, if you go to our website, we have a hub for educators where we have both our own resources and then we also curate resources from other organizations. If you go there, we have a lot of resources about stories. So and different ways that you could bring stories into into your teaching. Another place to check out is Green Card Voices, which again has videos, books, and programs giving more stories. And then lastly, if you go to the Teaching Immigration with Immigrant Stories project, this is through the University of Minnesota, they have great resources which gives primary source, these oral histories from many different people. So with that, I have about 5 minutes for questions. Please drop them in the chat if you have any. I'm seeing that people are noticing, right, the heroines that we include, Asians were not included, a whole bunch of groups are not included. So the question would be, why is that? And what can be done about it? And is that happening in the current day as well? I see another comment here that says, for so long, immigrants have been considered a burden and negative characters, so we must contrast that idea to show good immigrants to start and continue changing minds and sentiments. I mean, we certainly feel like that immigration it's been a part of history from the very beginning, and it's something that we should be showing all along, that it's a story now, and it's always been a part of the US.